Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today on this important topic of being an effective manager. My name is Michelle Rapp. I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Career Strategy in the Office of Alumni Relations at Northeastern, and I organize programs such as these. I'm very excited to have Dr. Tan Morales with us here today to share her expertise on this topic. Dr. Tan Morales currently leads learning and development, organizational change, performance, talent enablement, and career for Equifax in Atlanta. She's passionate about aligning people and business strategy, enhancing innovation, and personal and professional development. She brings 2 decades of leadership and learning in the areas of change and innovation, talent and leadership development, and data and analytics. Dr. Tan spent many years in the finance vertical prior to making the move to the human resource space. She loves to learn, as evidenced by her many degrees. She has a doctorate in leading change and innovation from Northeastern, 2 master's degree in business and psychology, and a Bachelor of Business Administration in finance and accounting. She has a lot to say on this topic, and I'm really looking forward to her expertise. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Can you guys hear me okay? Awesome. Well, welcome. Thank you guys for your time. As she said, I'm Dr. Tan Morales, and I am really passionate about management, leadership, personal, professional development, all the things that thrust us forward as leaders in our home, in our organizations, in our extracurricular activities, and our volunteerism. I think it's just always really, really important just to understand, kind of who you are and how you show up in the world, right, as a leader. So today we're talking about succeeding in management. And I understand that this is a topic of interest, as some are currently managers, maybe new managers, maybe aspiring managers. And so I'd love to hear from you guys as we start to say, as we think about management, right? Sometimes that can be a bit fuzzy. What is management? What exactly does a manager do? What does it take to be a good manager, right? There's tons of schools of thought about that. So what I'll start with is, if anyone will be brave enough to tell us, you can feel free to come off mute. You don't have to turn on your camera if you don't want. But are there any manager horror stories out there? Does anyone have a terrible manager they'd love to tell us that experience in a few lines or so?
I had a manager who gave us the same performance review to all of my coworkers.
Oh.
So there was no room for growth there.
Wow. Kind of a copy and paste, huh? Everyone gets a cheese and you get all the same wording. Wow, that's awesome. That's inspirational, right? Thanks for sharing that, Ellie. Anyone else? Anyone have any manager horror stories?
We have something here in the chat, or Dorian saying that they said that they did not care if a team member quit and they would just hire someone else versus address the issue.
Oh, wow. I can have another you in a minute, huh? Yeah. We have someone, Samantha here said, had a manager that was scared of their team's success or knowledge, right? So a bit of insecurity there. Anyone else want to chime in via chat or live?
You're on mute, Michelle.
Last night, a friend was talking about her manager at a very impromptu meeting, doesn't usually meet with her, and suddenly launched into a performance review with very vague goals. That was bad.
Wow, just on the spot, wasn't prepared for it. Hey, it's performance review time. I was supposed to schedule this with you. I didn't. Let's put this together in 5 minutes or less, huh? Wow. Yeah, so, I've heard, we've seen some managers with perhaps a bit of insecurity, right? Maybe even in their own skill set. Communication sounds like it's a bit challenged, a bit of a challenge here. And that's typically what you hear is kind of at the root of management issues. So I'll share a story with you guys, my manager horror story. And it actually ended up changing my career trajectory, believe it or not. So I was working for Turner Broadcasting at the time. I was in my early to mid 20s, and I was a financial analyst. And there was a woman that had been promoted to be my manager because the woman that hired me took another position in the company. So I was 3 weeks into working for Turner Broadcasting. I was supporting TBS and TNT. And all the budgeting and forecasting for what was aired, pretty much, Friends episodes on TBS. And this woman was promoted to be a manager, right? Because she was promoted because she had the most tenure out of anyone. And her tenure with the company was only 9 months. So it kind of tells you a bit about, what the culture was like there. And, there was a high turnover culture. And the poor woman just would lash out, cry, run out of meetings. And I would often find her, in the bathroom, splashing water on her face, cleaning tears off her face. And it was just recurring. She was overwhelmed. She was underskilled. She had been promoted into this role and wasn't provided any resources for how to do that, right? She's a first-time manager. She didn't understand what me and my team did. She worked on a completely different team. So she wasn't prepared. She wasn't prepared for the work. She wasn't prepared for the role, and she was just overwhelmed. And that actually was the reason that I made the choice to pivot from finance over to HR, because it was very apparent to me how important management skills were, right? And how important they are, it is to have those, those experiences at your company, right? Even if it's just, someone shadow, one-on-one mentoring, some sort of exposure. It could be a manager onboarding program or training, something, right? Something that prepares people for this experience. So that was a pivotal moment for me to say, this is important. I have personally experienced how this is important, right? Because her anxiety obviously made the rest of us feel a little bit crazy, often trying to talk her off the ledge, right? When she was intended to be the team leader. So, that's one of the reasons why I've really said, throughout my career, management is just so important. And oftentimes individual contributors are promoted to be managers, right? Because they're great at what they do. But there's a lot to unpack as a manager. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So if you wouldn't mind, again, you can come off of mute, or you can tell me in the chat, what makes a good manager or a not so great manager? We've heard communication. A little bit of self-confidence. Go ahead, Ellie.
I think that for me, one of my best managers has been really strong because she gives really clear guidelines of what she's looking for. So I know what the expectations are, which also means I know if I'm not meeting them.
Yeah, that's a big deal, right? Having that clarity, knowing what success looks like, and having a bit of a measuring stick, right? There's no worse scenario to be in than you don't really know if you're doing a good job. You're not getting a ton of feedback. The instructions maybe were a bit more vague than you intended, right? So you're kind of in this space of ambiguity, right? So I see here micromanaging, empathy, absolutely, being an active listener, not willing to be flexible, right? And that can go so many different ways, right? From the time to changing priorities, right? If they need to change. A good manager gives goals and then pretty much hands them off to let you do the work that needs to be done. Good manager gives trust and instills trust. Creates an environment that allows people to be vulnerable. Great. Providing necessary transparency, psychological safety, such an important topic today, right? Everything that's going on and people are being affected in a myriad of different ways, in terms of mental health. So great listener, being available, being a coach, and being invested in your success, and being your advocate. That is a huge one. Brian, speaking on your behalf, right, and touting your praises when you're not in the room, just kind of actively serving as your sponsor. So all great things, right? So we know what it takes to be a great manager, but then, you know, we've all had some not so great managers, right? So what's the role of a manager, right? And I'll ask you guys to chime in on this as well. So I've listed a few here. Onboarding new team members, interviewing and hiring, motivating and influencing the team, and sometimes that means in the face of adversity, right? Having career conversations, pursuing aspirations, meaning understanding what the aspirations are of folks on your team. Coaching, you guys mentioned that. Conducting performance reviews, Michelle, hopefully, you know, not last minute with vague goals there. Interviewing and hiring. Communication is key, right? Having clarity around roles and responsibilities, communicating organizational changes, team changes, touting your team's success, so that person's team success, to leadership, right? Like, here's all the great things that my team has done, right? That's a part of being a great manager. Giving and receiving feedback, right? That the receiving is important because feedback definitely needs to be bi-directional. And that's often a miss, right? Where, you know, in more traditional settings, a manager can give feedback, right? A manager can provide, you know, critiques, if you will, or do coaching, right? But it's not always accepted the other way around, right? And in a really great relationship, it's great for you to be able to say to your manager, hey, I have an idea about, or, you know, it would be really great if, or I would love if you would have more meetings about X, or, you know, whatever the case may be. And rewarding a job well done, right? So it's a lot. It's lots of different things to balance, right? When you're thinking about the work that needs to happen, right, from the individual manager, from the team, and organizationally what it takes to become a manager. It can be very confusing. It can be a confusing place, and lots of things to master, right? Lots of things to work on. Your interpersonal skills and personal skills, your organizational skills, right? You need to be strategic and thinking vision and longer term, right? But then have a culture of execution as well, right? So lots of varying things to balance. So yeah, as we think about what it takes to be a good manager, we first need to talk about like what is the role of a manager, right? And being successful and having a successful team. So there's kind of three major factors at play for me here. There's the navigating the employee life cycle and doing this well. And I think this is to Michelle's point earlier about the performance review, this is something that is often a miss. We, as folks kind of come into management, they tend to think, oh, great, I'll get more autonomy. I'll be able to make more decisions. I'll make, more money, right? But that also comes with more responsibility, right? More organizational responsibility, leading through others, and understanding where each of your employees is in the life cycle, right? And it's not something that folks are really thinking about earlier, right? Earlier in their career, in terms of where am I in this employee life cycle, or where are my different team members or teammates in this employee life cycle, and what should I be doing right now to support, where they are. So we'll talk about that. The second major factor at play is emotional intelligence, right? EQ. Super important. Someone brought up psychological safety earlier, right? So we'll dig into emotional intelligence. And then the third I'll just say is contextual awareness, right? So understanding the context of what's happening right now, whether on a macro or a micro level, right? So on the macro level, it could be what's happening in the world. It could be what's happening in your organization, or micro level could be, what's happening in your life as a manager, or what's happening in the lives of those that you're serving, right, on your team. So we'll dive into these three. So what is the employee life cycle, right? I remember the first time when I was first promoted to manager, it felt a bit more like baptized by fire, right? You become a manager, and then all of a sudden you get these emails that says you're now responsible for X. Well, what is X, right? How do I do X? How do I do X well? It's not uncommon for for companies to not have resources in these spaces to kind of help onboard new managers, right? Or walk you through if you're newly promoted as a manager. So I'll walk through each of these quickly. So the first one is recruiting, right? So either you have an opening on your team, you have someone exiting on your team, et cetera, right? So you need to be thinking about your team brand and how you're attracting people to your team, whether internally or externally. And then as you are, ramping up candidates to come to your team, you'll need to assess them, right? Your interviews, or if you guys use personality assessments or psychological assessments, leadership assessments, however, that happens at your organizations, and you're assessing them for company fit, for culture fit, for role fit, and usually, hopefully, using multiple lenses, right? Using multiple pieces of feedback. It could be a work sample, it could be interviews, it could be assessments, it could be references, recommendations. You want to get as much information as you can. Really thinking about not only what's best for your team, but what's best for them, right? So think about that in the context that we live in today. There are some folks that have decided that I don't want to go back into an office, right? And it's very, it behooves you as a manager, as you're, bringing folks to your organization, to say transparently, my company is looking at having us in the office 2 or 3 days a week. Will that work for you? Because if it doesn't, right, someone can have a fantastic skill set, but, actually not be a culture fit, if you will, if the culture is mandating, in-person meeting. So, something to think about, right? Like, is it a good fit for both of you guys, right? Both of you are kind of selling, you're selling the organization to the person, and the person is, selling them those skill sets to you. And then to the point that was made earlier, communicating success, letting people know right up front, here's what good looks like. Here's how we measure success. Here's how we reward and recognize. And this is what it takes to do a really, great job in this role. So people understand what exactly it is that will make them, will contribute to their growth, right? And if they have a career trajectory at the organization. Onboarding, right? You got someone new in, and typically what I've seen in the research is that most onboarding programs really focus on the first week. And they are very compliance driven, right? So it's more around paperwork and payroll and benefits and all the things that, that you need to do to bring someone on board. But there's a whole other part, about onboarding, and it should really last no less than 6 months when someone comes into an organization. As a manager, it's your responsibility to ensure they understand what their role is, right? What their responsibilities are, what their accountabilities are. What are their specific deliverables? What does success look like? Help them make connections, give them the exposure that they need, give them the tools and resources that they need to be successful. Help them set their goals, usually within the first 30 days or so, right? Someone should have a good enough understanding of who the company is and what their department does and what their role will be to be able to draft up, a set of goals and say, this is what I'd like to focus on the next, for the next 90 days or 6 months or a year, right? So helping onboarding employees. And I'll say this isn't only specifically for new employees, right? If you're a manager, sometimes you're onboarding new employees, but something that's often missed and overlooked is if someone gets a new scope of responsibility, if someone is promoted into a different role, or sometimes there's just an organizational realignment, that there may be some ramp up time needed, right, in terms of onboarding. So onboarding is typically traditionally only looked at as if someone that's brand new into the company, but it's a miss if you don't understand that people need ramp up time for any kind of organizational changes. So onboarding, of course, developing, continuing to develop, one of my favorites, of course. And the first one is to understand their aspirations. And I think that this is one of those things that either, if you're not open to it, you got to get open to it, right? Asking the folks on your team, what is it that you would like to do next? being open and transparent and having those conversations and not assuming that everyone wants to do the exact same thing that they're doing and work for you for the remainder of their career, right? Because your job as a manager is to know that, understand that, and help them get there. There's a great book that I fell in love with some years ago called Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go. And it, you know, it really underlines that point, right? Like, make sure that you are providing the folks on your team every single opportunity you can to get them the exposure that they need and to understand what it is that they are aspiring to do next, or just could be other developmental opportunities for that, right? Because that is your job. You know, if people aren't getting what they need, they will leave, right? And if you want to retain folks and keep great people around with great energy and great work ethic, then you'll need to make sure that you're invested in their development. Speaking of which, has anyone ever heard of the 70-20-10 rule? Sometimes it's referred to as the 3 E's. In chat, let me know. Ever heard of the 70-20-10 rule? Or sometimes it's referred to as the 3 E's. Alrighty, so 70-20-10 rule or 3 E's is this. I'll give you kind of both versions. They mean the exact same thing. 70-20-10 means, as we're thinking about development, oftentimes the first thing that comes to mind is, if I want to become an X, right? Or if I want to do X, I need to go to a training class, right? I need to go get a certification. In some cases, that's true, right? But by and large, that is not the case, right? So it says, you know, the rule, the philosophy basically says, as you're thinking about development, as you're thinking about that next step, as you're thinking about how you'll spend your time, only 10% of that time really should be in formal education. Now, of course, this is coming from someone that has a lot of education, but I do not discount all of the other education I've received outside of formal education, right? Having the opportunity to live and work overseas, taking stretch assignments, getting exposure to other businesses, getting exposure to higher level leaders, to other industries. It's been phenomenal. So this 10% of that time should be informal training. 20% of the time that you think about delegating to development should be in the terms of exposure. So maybe that's mentorships, that is professional associations, right? That is sponsors, you know, friends, whomever, people that can put you in places, people that can advocate for you, people that can introduce you to other concepts, right? Help you think about your career trajectory, just the exposure, just bringing new information into the system, ultimately. And then the 70% is actually by doing, it's actually by hands-on experience. So raise your hand and say, I would love to take a stretch project, you know, sign me up for the thing. I'll volunteer to do X, Y, and Z. And it's really a powerful way to own your own development. Oftentimes, you know, we feel as though, you know, either my company needs to pay for this training class or for this MBA, or I'll have to pay for this thing out of pocket, or you know, and there's really no other opportunities. But opportunities are everywhere. There's so much education, especially now. You know, YouTube and TED Talks and and free webinars everywhere you turn, right? And the ability through social networking to meet people all across the globe. So again, the 70-20-10 rule is 70% of your time should be spent doing, hands-on learning, taking a chance, taking a risk to learn something new. 20% of that time should be dedicated to exposure, and then 10% of that time to formal education. So it's also referred to as the 3 E's, which is education, exposure, experience. So think about that as you guys are developing, you know, it's the top of the year, you're thinking about goals and what you're going to accomplish professionally and personally. I would encourage you guys to write it out in that order. You know, what am I going to go kind of proactively pursue versus, you know, who do I need to get greater exposure versus, you know, what formal education can I take advantage of, or certification or training class, or even things like this, right? I would count this under the 10. The next one is retaining and promoting, right? So you're a great manager. You're always thinking about how to reward and recognize your folks for a job well done. And I think it's really important to understand what matters most. That actually is a survey tool that that I've used in a previous life. It's called What Matters Most. And it's basically just a questionnaire that you can either send to folks or just kind of anecdotally gather over time in terms of how do they like to be rewarded or recognized. Some people love being touted on public calls, right? Or, brought to the front of the room to say, Brian LeBlanc has done a fantastic job and we want to recognize him for X, right? Some people love the awards, right? Some people like private recognition, right? For some, that makes public recognition makes them uncomfortable, right? Some people would prefer some sort of financial incentive, maybe a gift card or on spot bonus, if you guys have heard of that, right, where you have the ability to just kind of give someone an extra $1,000 or something for a job well done. But understanding what your folks like, how they like to be recognized, and continuing to reward them for a job well done. And sometimes it's just words, right? Sometimes it's a physical token. Sometimes it's compensation driven, right? Just understanding your team is important there. You should always have opportunities for bi-directional feedback. And not just once a year when you're doing performance reviews, but, ask folks every now and again, can you tell me anything that you'd like for me to stop doing, start doing, or do more of? Those are 3 easy questions to ask: start doing, stop doing, or do more of. Just to get some feedback, what's working for you in terms of how often we meet or how we communicate. Do I send you too many emails? Do you not like it when I text you after hours? Whatever those things may be. And then the last thing that I would say in terms of, retaining folks is always having opportunities for growth, for innovation, encouraging people to participate in engagement or volunteerism, right? So whether that's their favorite charity or it's participating in global employee networks or affinity groups or business resource groups or whatever they may be called at your organization, just continuing to offer opportunities for that, for their own personal edification, as well as professional. And then the other call out here is if you have folks that are promoted, again, to this earlier point, the cycle starts over with onboarding. And that's something that's easy to overlook, that there will now be a new set of responsibilities, right, with new stakeholders and new measures of success that we need to offer grace for and give people time, allow them time to ramp up and learn what it takes to be successful again. And then so, at the end of the life cycle here, we have separate, right? So whether it's voluntary, involuntary, if it's involuntary, meaning, someone is being asked to leave or the organization is downsizing or restructuring or reorganizing, just ensuring that you communicate early and you communicate often and as openly as you can, right? As people are navigating, what their financial impact might be. If it's voluntary, getting all the information that you can to understand, if they were looking at another role, was it because they wanted to expand their skills, right? It was because you didn't do so great of a job as a manager. Just whatever you can take, in terms of data, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of a survey. An exit survey can, but just really understanding if people are leaving voluntarily, it's always a good notion to find out if there is a trend, right? If people are leaving for higher compensation, if they're leaving because there's lack of career growth, they could be leaving because of your management style, tons of reasons that people leave. And they often say people leave managers in that organization. So really a great point of self-reflection, and give them a warm exit, regardless if it's voluntary or involuntary, and making sure that, that you keep those lines of communication open. So that's the first one, right? So if I go back here, doesn't look like it'll let me back to the slide. Navigating the employee life cycle well, right? There are all kinds of things that you can do to master, recruitment, onboarding, et cetera, right? To learn along the way. The second one that I'll mention is emotional intelligence. This is so important. Someone mentioned psychological safety earlier. Emotional intelligence is kind of twofold, right? So you have the things that you recognize in yourself and others, and then the things that you do to regulate what it is that that you've learned, right? So I'm sure all of us have run into people where we felt like maybe their comments were off color, or they didn't do a great job reading the room, or they said something inappropriate, or they made you feel a certain way, right? There's sometimes people may spark feelings in us, right? Just because of their communication style, as an example. So the first part is your kind of personal competence, being aware of who you are. Understand, as an example, that self-awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself. I love assessments, personality assessments, psychological assessments, career assessments, leadership assessments. There's any bit of information that I can get in terms of insights on myself, and I would always encourage you guys to do that, right? Whether your communication style, it could be your personality, right? And it always gives you that context to think about, who you are in terms of your presence. How do you show up, right? I know, for instance, you guys are experiencing me now as probably a high energy, fast talker. That's who I am. It's who I am all the time, right? And I realize that, and sometimes I'll have to say, hey, and I'm going to say this to you guys now. If I'm talking too fast, it's okay. Throw me a chat and say, hey, can you repeat that? Can you slow down? Can you go back to the slide? I'm totally fine with that, right? I'm just excitable. it's what it is, right? So self-awareness and emotional awareness, and having a really accurate self-assessment. One of the assessments that I love that you guys can do free online, if you've never taken what's called the DISC assessment, DISC, it really speaks to your communication style and also the how you get things done. I love the DISC assessment. You guys can go online. You can actually take it online. It's like a 5-minute, maybe 7-minute assessment. It gives you back a report instantly that tells you what your communication style is. And it helps you understand the communication styles of others. And, maybe, you realize, oh, I understand why Caesar and I have such a hard time communicating, is because we're on opposite ends of the spectrum, right? So, if you're a person, that is big picture, thinker, you love systemic thinking, you love thinking about end to end, and you're a visionary, right? It may be very challenging for someone that is more of a conscientious person, that is in the details and needs to understand the exact intricacies of something in order for it to click and make sense for them. Knowing those things about yourself will help you regulate how you communicate with that person, so you can land well, right? You're just really thinking about, how do you show up in the space? How are people experiencing you, right? What do they say about you when you walk out of the room, or how do they feel? How do they feel when you walk into a room, right? So that's really, really important because it helps you with regulation, again, and understanding who you are helps you understand how to adapt, your style. As you think about motivating and influencing others, right? Think about the teams. If you guys are leading teams, you have folks that are on your teams, it's it can't necessarily be a one size fits all communication style. Everyone may not resonate well with that. So if you're announcing something, as an example, in a team meeting, and you're saying, hey, this is the big picture and this is the big vision, and everyone get excited, here's what we're gonna do, right? Not everyone may not be excited. There may be some folks on your team that need you to follow up with that email so they can process, so they can think through the details, so they can think through, what does this mean for me? And understanding that helps you be a better leader, right? Helps you understand how to motivate and influence in multiple dimensions. The second part of that is the social competence, right? So, so as you think about who you are, you also think about the impact that you have on others. So it's one thing to think about, your presence and how you show up, but then how they're receiving it. And so you can use that in relationship management, right? As maybe, that shows up in taking an interest in other people, inspiring other people, managing conflict, helping with, as you understand who you are, you can understand that impact and how that pendulum might swing. It's really, really valuable in in relationships as well, right? Because if you say, you know, I show up this way and I know that my partner is, you know, going to show up this way, you can always kind of proactively think about how to mitigate confusion, right? How to kind of keep down the conflict, because you know this person is going to need to hear something in this way, right? Or they're going to want this level of detail, right? So just that emotional intelligence is really key, and you know, in all relationships, including the, you know, those of your team. So number 3 here is contextual awareness. I would be remiss to say that the role of being a manager has gotten even more complex, you know, of course, over the last couple of years, because of what's happening in the world. And it really, really is forcing folks that have never thought about it before to understand every single person on your team. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert in everything that they're an expert in, but it does mean taking the time to understand who they are as a person, what they value, right? So for some people right now, you think about what they value, what matters to them. Parenting and balancing that has been a challenge. I will attest to that myself. I have a 2-year-old and an 8-year-old, and the last 2 years have been challenging, especially with the 2-year-old boy in the house, and trying to find multiple places to work. He will notice I'm in a closet office right now, so I can keep down the noise, right? It's important to me to have a quiet space to work with having small children, and also thinking about what might they be dealing with or experiencing, right? And that kind of takes you to intersectionality, right? With their race or their gender or their marital status, you know, parents or not, you know, it's really important to understand the context, right? As you show up with empathy and authentic empathy, right? As you're delivering messages, or sometimes just making it a point to ask before you get into any work business, how are you? How are you? And how are you, right? How is your family? Is everyone well? How are you dealing? Are you managing? Anything I can do to support you? And really asking that and meaning it. I have a young lady on my team that that just lost her mom to COVID unexpectedly. Just, you know, she was running a fever for a few days, and then she spent 2 months in the hospital, and she lost her. And I just forced her out yesterday, like, go take some time off. Like, she's like, I know I want to work. I have these projects. And for her own mental health, you're being completely paid. I don't care about how much vacation time you have. Just please go take some time, you know? And it's really important to understand the context and show up with empathy and just allow people the time and space they need to be human beings, because they are that first before they are, you know, working for you or with you alongside you. So contextual awareness is really key, and doing something as simple as asking 2 or 3 times, how are you? How's the family? How are you doing? And if they give you a response that is less than favorable, let that be okay. If they say, you know what, I'm not doing well, then maybe the conversation that you had about the project update can be tabled for another time. So you can dig into, hey, what's going on? Is there anything that I can do to support you? And it'll have to be fine. You know, work will go on. But as people, we need to be recognized as people first. So, you know, that is just really, really important, you know, now more than ever, to make sure that we're understanding, you know, what matters to folks and how they're, you know, what their mental space is like, you know, on a daily or weekly basis. Any questions about that? Alrighty, so I'll move on. So I put together this, you know, what I would consider kind of a great framework to follow as a manager, you know, to kind of put these things together. You know, I call this my 7 C's method. So thinking about that employee life cycle, right? You know, what happens at the top of the year, or what happens when you're onboarding someone new? The first thing is ensure that you're providing connection, that you're helping folks on your team connect to the organizational strategy, to understand how their role fits into that strategy, and how their role is essential for success. Oh, love it. Thank you for that, Jessica. I'm floating all over every single day. How their role is essential for success. The second thing is they need clarity, and this one came up earlier in the chat. Clarity on what needs to be delivered, and what are the minimum outcomes for success, right? Give someone the tools that they need to be successful and blow the minimums out of the water. Help the employee to craft their business and their development goals, and that's important. That is a really great call out. Oftentimes at the top of the year, right, we're thinking about organizational goals and what do I want to accomplish, this year or this quarter. But it's also really important to encourage folks to set their developmental goals, and that can be a bit awkward at first for them, right? Because sometimes they're saying, well, I don't know, and I hadn't really thought about it, but help them with that, right? Help them say, there's one thing that you want to do, that you want to learn, right? There's one thing that you want to get better at. Maybe it's creating PowerPoint presentations, right? Or being more comfortable speaking publicly, right? Something that you can, set together, that this is really important for me as a person, like this is what I want to develop, professionally. So making sure that folks do that alongside their business goals, as we're all evolving, right? And it's important to be able to come to the table and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about in terms of what I'd like to accomplish, but this is how I'd like to get there. And this is what I'd like to work on. Weekly check-ins and timely coaching, right? So coaching on the fly, right? Giving feedback. And so it's a muscle, right? It's a muscle that we can continue to flex and say, hey, I love this about what you've put together. I would also really love to see X, right? Helping people with positive reinforcement to understand what your expectations are so that at some point they can blow it out the water and not need your feedback. Right? They know exactly what it is that you expect and what you think good looks like. But we have to make sure that we offer that up, to say, I really like when PowerPoint presentations, are designed in this way. Or I really love it when, if you create a report, if you can make me a summary tab, just to, and send me 3 bullets that, that gives me the high level analysis of all the detail that you put together, right? Help people understand that this is what great looks like. And so you can do that on the fly and get them used to getting that feedback and get their confidence up, right? So they know that when I send this to, Dorian, that Dorian is going to be blown away. And calibration, right? So taking that time to say, hey, let's take a time out. The priorities have changed. That happens all the time, right? Our funding is lost. That happens all the time. Our team is growing or shrinking. That happens all the time. And here's how we're going to adjust or adapt as needed, right? So taking that time to calibrate is really key. Oftentimes people feel like they're asked to do more with less. And if that is the case, then we need to fairly say, okay, so then what is it that I'm willing to give up as a manager, right? So I'm not trying to squeeze the life, and unintentionally, right? So I don't squeeze the life out of this person, because we all need headspace to be creative, to be innovative, to just think like, we should all be able to put time on our calendars to just think, right? To think through what's going to happen next week or next month. So you want to make sure that you're creating space for that. So quarterly, employee-led, which is important, quarterly formal career checkpoints. I would encourage you guys to get your folks used to leading a career conversation with you. It may be a bit awkward for them in the beginning, but when you have that formal check-in to say, hey, here's how I've done on my goals, here's how I've done on my developmental goals. It really helps them with self-confidence. It helps them with articulating what it is that they've accomplished, right? And it also helps them more readily craft their aspirations, right? And be really kind of in tune with what their career trajectory is. And then celebrate. Make sure you celebrate their wins and resist the urge to take credit. Something that I'm sure many of us have experienced is that, you do something great and then, your manager is rewarded or recognized, right? And you're thinking, wow, I put so much work and effort into that, right? So as a manager, don't be that person. Make sure that you give that exposure, let that person's name shine in lights, give them the credit for the work that they've done, right? And treat them the way that you would want your manager to treat you. Any questions there? Anything to chime in on here? Thank you for that. I appreciate that. A few things that I'll leave you with. One, before I move off of this slide. So I work in talent management, talent enablement, talent transformation, all different words for, you know, my job is to make sure that people can become their best selves, their best professional selves. And I really don't actually prefer the language of performance management or even talent management. I actually prefer the language of enablement, right? Performance enablement, talent enablement, because it's more empowering to me. You know, I think about an employee is, you know, performance conversations. I would encourage you to really think about that language and, you know, really let it be more about performance enablement, because all of these things are to help them be successful. And that feels more bottom up, right? To help empower me and be successful versus manage, right? I'm gonna manage and oversee, you know, who you are, right? And that can be, you know, particularly stifling for folks. So, you know, think about that as enabling individual and organizational growth as an aside here. A few things, you know, in my humble opinion, the three most important things you can do as a manager, and I'll put these together for you guys. You guys will have access to these slides. The first is building career partnerships, helping folks understand that they're in charge of their career and you are in support of that. I'll say that again, that they are in charge of their career and you're in support of that. This is, you know, oftentimes folks feel like they're waiting for their manager to tap them on the shoulder, you know, with the magic sword, right? And it's important to communicate that you own your career as an employee. You can drive that forward. If you come to me with some ideas, some things that you may want to see, do, experience, some exposure, whatever barriers I can move for you, I absolutely will, because that is my job. To make sure that they are promoting, that you promote dedicated time to work on whatever those aspirations are that they've set for themselves, right? So on my team, as an example, we have two 3-hour blocks, Tuesday afternoons and Thursday mornings, where I have asked everybody on my team to block time from Tuesday afternoon from 2 to 5, Thursday morning from 9 to 12. This is your time free of meetings. This is your time to work, to plan, to strategize, to do that course you've been meaning to do, to listen to that recorded webinar that you missed, to think about, you know, to write out your developmental goals, whatever. This is your protected time. And it's my job as a leader to honor that, right? So I don't ping them or email them during that time. I don't ask that we put meetings on the calendar during that time, because that is their protected time, to ensure that they have the space that they need to get things done. And then the last thing I'll say is be clear on the delineation of roles, right? Who's going to do what, so they know exactly where the line starts for me and ends for me, and what it takes to be successful. So there's a one-pager that I've included here around, you know, what employees can do to own their career development conversations, to be open about their aspirations, and what it takes for a manager to support those things and to focus on helping their employee gather new experiences, right? Oftentimes we think of in terms of positions, right? I want to move up the ladder, but that trajectory may look very, very different. And so helping folks, you know, to get as many experiences under their belt as they can. So that's the first one, is building career partnerships with the folks on your team. The second one is coaching. And as a manager, I'd say, you know, be aware of yourself and your own blind spots and your own tendencies. And make sure that you're ensuring clarity, that you coach in the moment. Don't wait until 2 weeks later and say, you know, I really didn't like what you did around X, right? You know, pull someone to the side and say, hey, I would love it if, right? You can relay the same message with the more positive intention and tone, and focus on the outcomes rather than the inputs, right? So help people understand what the big goal is, right? I would love to see this in a deliverable. It can convey X, right? The goal is for the client to understand why, versus how to get there. Let them figure out how to get there. And if they need some help, then they can come to you, but You know, the beauty in the creative process is going, you know, doing just that, right? Getting a chance to be creative and tell a story, whether it's in data, or whether it's in presentations or proposals, or, you know, whatever the story mechanism is. And then also, you know, when speaking to our employees, make sure that we're asking questions, right? And ask more questions and ask more questions. And that's really hard because in a time crunch, you just want to say, hey, I need you to do the thing, and you just need to move on. But you really need to understand that they understand, that they, you know, understand the whatever it is that you're looking to get, right? That they understand the timetable and commitment, that they have a clear understanding of what the duration of time that it would take to do the thing, you know, and make sure that you lean into their strengths. I have a guy on my team that I actually hired at my previous company and brought him over here to Equifax with me. And he's phenomenal at a ton of things. And the one way that I know that he really shines is when he gets to be creative. You know, if I come to him with something like, hey, you know, I really have an idea. I'd love to be able to, you know, and I'll try to articulate this, you know, some big vision that I have that I've been sleeping on, you know, waking me up out of my sleep because I'm all excited and inspired. When he gets the opportunity to put something together and tell that story, he is on fire, right? Like he gets the opportunity to, you know, create the graphics or to do the proposal or the PowerPoint or create the training or, you know, tell the story in front of the leaders. Any opportunity that he gets to be creative or to work with the brand team, the creative team, et cetera, it just lights him up. So I really try to lean into that because I know that that's something that he really, really loves. I'm not for or against the sandwich message for feedback. I hear conflicting opinions. You know, I really think it comes down to personal style, right? So I tend to be a person when giving feedback that I tend to be very direct, right? But I will skew more towards what I'd like to see rather than what is quote unquote wrong, right? It's hard for anybody to hear, you know, you really didn't hit the mark on, right? You really should have done a better job at, I think, being very clear around what it is that that you need to convey, what the goal is, like what you want as a deliverable and how it can, you know, better get there, I think is a really great method for giving feedback. I think sometimes the sandwich method can feel like a method and not feel authentic. So I really think it just kind of comes down to whatever your style is, whatever, you know, kind of resonates and feels authentic for you. Great question. And so I'll leave you guys with my favorite leadership development myths debunked. The first one is attending a leadership course will make you a better leader. You know, wrong answer. Most people lose 70 to 80% of what they learn within 24 hours, right? So you're going to walk away with some nuggets of information, some things that resonated with you, right? You may remember one thing I said and you know, and all this time together. But the brain requires reinforcement, you know, that continuous recall, repetition. So attending a leader course and doing something to put in place what you've learned will make you a better leader, right? Just attending the course will not, right? You have to have that practical application. And the brain requires you to continue to bring it up to exercise that muscle. Leadership development opportunities must be given to me by my manager, right? Wrong, right? Leadership is all around us. Raise your hand for something you've never done. Take initiative. I'll tell you guys, at my previous company, I moved, I told you guys I made the move from finance into HR. And so when I moved into HR, I'd never had an HR role. And in 6 years, I got 4 promotions. And the reason is because I always raised my hand. I always said, you know, when I saw that there was a need, I'll do that, I'll own that. And sometimes I didn't tell anyone, sometimes I just did it because it needed to be done. And that was continuously, you know, recognized. And I remember when I had my first child, she's 8 now. I remember they were hiring my would-be manager. And I was on maternity leave. When I came back to a brand new person. And this lady never laid eyes on me in her life. And in our first one-on-one, she promoted me. And I'm thinking, you know, why, how did that happen? And she said, you've been out for 3 months, and every single meeting that I walk into, someone says, oh, Tan owns this, oh, Tan does this, you know, she's responsible for, you know, X, Y, and Z. And she's like, your reputation precedes you. So leadership development, again, doesn't have to be given to you by anyone. That's something that you own and you can drive forward. Leadership development is not expensive. There's any number of resources that you see listed on the slide. It's too time consuming. I'd say make it a priority. You don't have to have two 3-hour blocks on your calendar, but maybe it's a 1-hour block. That's what we encourage at my organization, 1 hour a week dedicated to professional development. And leadership development is reserved for those who manage people. We're all leaders. Either, you know, maybe we're leading teams of the organization, or maybe we're just leading ourselves, right? So, you know, adopt a growth mindset and always think about how to bring new information into the system, right? Into yourself, into your psyche, into your habits, and how you show up as a leader. So with that being said, that's all I had today. Thank you guys so much for your time. I'll hang out for a few extra minutes if anyone wants to chat, talk, or whatever. I hope you've enjoyed our time together today.
And this is fabulous. I feel like you've condensed weeks or years of management and leadership training into an hour. My head's a little full, but I feel like you covered a lot of unique aspects, really conveyed that importance of ownership, and distill a lot of valuable practices. So really some things that we can apply right away. And I appreciate the idea of our own ownership, as well as some particulars that we can implement ourselves. And I really like the Morales 7 C's. That's great. So I think we have a lot to think of here. I appreciate all of you coming. And if you do want to stick around for some more questions, that would be great. Thanks, everyone. And thank you again for sharing your expertise, Tan.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on camera, Dorian. Good to meet you.
I had a question. I had raised my hand. I don't know if y'all can see it.
Oh, go for it.
So I was, I want to go back to the thing. I don't know what slide it was, but you were talking about, I guess, kind of letting your manager know things that you're interested in or things that you want to do, so that they can kind of help with that growth. I guess my question would be, like, I have in the past reached out to mentors for different things. And I had a supervisor tell me, he was like, you have to be very careful who you reach out to for mentors or who you talk to for assistance, because if they feel intimidated by you, they will not help you. So how does that work with the slide that you were talking about, as far as like letting your manager know what you might be interested in, or how they can help develop you if you maybe have a manager that may be intimidated by the skills that you have, or what, or they just may be intimidated even though you don't have the same goals, but they're just intimidated and may not be willing to help you get the skills or the knowledge or things that you need in order to move to the next level?
Yeah, great question. So I'd say this really kind of goes back to emotional intelligence, right? If you feel like you have a manager that wouldn't be in support, ask yourself a few questions. You know, why would they not be in support, right? What is your feeling about? Is it because they don't want to lose you? Is it because they don't want you to gain more skills or education or experience than them, right? Is it because you're doing a great job and they don't want to have to replace you? You know, just kind of ask yourself the questions of why wouldn't someone support that? And if you really get down to, because you know, in a perfect world, we'd love for all managers to be open to developing and, you know, their folks and moving on and moving out, right? That may not be the case, and that's fine. That just means that after you do the work, I will say, give your manager a chance. Try, test out something. Hey, I'm interested in X. Put a feeler out there before you make an assumption, right? And if it does seem like the person is not in support for whatever reason, then use your resources. Maybe that's human resources. Maybe that's a coach. Maybe that's a mentor. Maybe that's a sponsor or an advocate in another part of the organization, but make friends, right? Because you don't want your direct manager to be a bottleneck for you and your own career growth, right? So I'd say try and increase your web of influence, right, and your connections within your organization before you maybe would look to make a change.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Alrighty, well, you guys have my contact information. It's here in the deck. If anything comes to mind, let me know. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and we'll be in touch soon.